Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I am Drew. I'm an exercise physiologist and acupuncturist. I teach yoga, medical qigong, and I've been doing so for probably about 20 years now. And I really kind of live in the world of exercise prescription for health conditions. That could be anything from like metabolic, such as like diabetes, to musculoskeletal, like lower back problems, and everything in between. When we are looking at exercise prescription, it really does help to understand how the body works mechanically. So biomechanics, bio is the kind of the Greek word for, living organism, the human organism, and mechanics is, how things move. So how the body moves, biomechanics. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at the back extensors. So pretty much the muscles that go from the lumbar spine, pelvis, sacrum, right up to the base of the skull, the occiput here. And these are all the muscles that are involved in creating a nice, good back posture, or what we call spinal extension. So where you straighten yourself up. So we're going to look at some very small muscles up to the long threading back extensor group, intercostalis, spinalis, erector spinae, intertransversarii, and the multifidi. So we're looking at these because they really all work together as one big team or one group in co-contractions. And it makes a lot of sense to kind of look at them individually and then as a whole. So we're going to do that in today's video. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please drop a like, a share, and as always, if you have any comments, just to kind of like help feed the YouTube algorithm, because that's what it's all about. And the more people who like and share, the more people get to see it pop up in their feed, so we can spread the knowledge and the learning, because this is all knowledge that anyone can learn. And lastly, we are also using the Complete Anatomy app. There will be a link in the comments below. So if you like what you see here, we're just scratching the surface of what you can do with Complete Anatomy. It's a fantastic learning tool. So hopefully I'm going to give you a little bit of an inspiration to go and get the app for yourself and start studying and learning. So whether you're a PT, allied health, massage therapist, someone who's just really interested in kind of movement, for your own learning in your own body, this is what we're all about. So let's get into it. So we've got the Complete Anatomy app loaded up already. And essentially what we're looking at here is the skeletal structure with no muscle. So we're going to put in some layers first. So just a quick layer explanation. Here we go. So we're going to go into these little muscles here that thread up in the spine, all the way up, even these little ones in the base of the neck, right up to the occiput here. And then the next layer on, we have this thicker muscle group that comes up. This is the multifidi. And we have some more coming up through the base of the head here. And then on another layer on top of that, we have these bad boys here, which is your longissimus muscle, because they're really long. And then one more layer on top of that, we have then your iliocostalis muscles, so costal ribs, and then they'll lay on top of that. Then we start to put in things like your posterior serratus muscles, and then we have our big lat muscles. So this is the kind of layers. And so these are all involved in back extension or spinal extension. We'll do a separate video on the lats because it's a big muscle and it deserves its own video. So let's go right back down into the first ones here. So we have intertransversarii lumborum. So let's break that down. So this part of the lumbar vertebrae here, this kind of bone that sticks out to the side, this is called the transverse process. So it's the part of the lumbar vertebrae that sticks out, and we have a lot of muscle attachments on these here. So your intertransversarii are busted muscles that go from one transverse process to another, and essentially go right up the spine on either side. So you're going to have the L4, L5 one, then you're going to have an L3, L4 one, and an L2, L3 bilaterally, so left and right, and they're going to thread all the way up the spine. So in the lumbar, they're quite thick, and then when you get into the thoracic region, okay, we have they're a lot smaller. And then we also get these rotatore muscles here as well. And so they go from basically the vertebral body, so the big, thick part of the vertebrae, out to the transverse process. And then they thread up the back as well. So you get the intertransversi, which are transverse process to transverse process, then the rotatores, which are the thoracic the vertebral body to the transverse process here as well. And then you also have these little ones that are more in the middle, which go from the vertebral body to the opposite side here as well. So they're bilateral. They're bilateral. And if we can see, maybe we'll get, yeah, and we also have ones here that come up between the spinous processes here as well. So the interspinalis here, spinous processes. So let's take all those muscles away. Essentially what you have, if I do it in a lumbar vertebrae, yeah, you have muscles that go from here to here, that intertransversarii. Then you have muscles that go from the transverse process to the lumbar bodies. They're the rotatores. And you can kind of like see that when the muscle contracts, it's going to pull. So it's going to create a twist or a rotation. And then you have the ones that go from spinous process to spinous process here. So each vertebrae has very small little muscles that control the very nuanced movement of the vertebrae themselves. So we call this segmental vertebral movement, right? So each vertebrae has its own muscles, small muscles that are attached to them that control side-to-side movement and then turning or rotation. And when you combine those two together, you get turning and rotation. So you get quadrant type movement. And so that allows you to have all these really subtle angles. Now, individually, each vertebrae doesn't have a lot of movement on its own, but when you stack them up together, that's where you get all the big spinal movements expressing out. And one aspect, particularly in back rehabilitation, that we're trying to do is to get all these little muscles working well. So we want to then be able to kind of isolate the spine in different positions. So then it helps facilitate those muscles to actually do their job. And you start off really gently, very slowly, and then you slowly build them out into stronger positions. So yoga is actually really, really good at doing this because yoga involves a lot of movements of the spine. If taught correctly over a long period of time, you get a lot of these little muscles well developed. Okay. Whereas if you're doing, for example, more like heavier resistance training where you want a stiffer spine, those muscles will still be trained to be stable and strong, but they may not have the movement quality that you perhaps want. Like everything in movement, there's a trade-off between stability and strength and movement. Okay, and each person's got a different kind of Venn diagram. So if you're doing super heavy resistance training, you might have more strength orientation. If you're more into dance, for example, you might have more mobility. And if you're like a skateboarder, you might be more stability is the thing that you want. But we all want at least a combination of all three of those. So that's the smaller little muscles. Let's see if we can get some motion up on them. Does the app give us some motion for these? They do. Perfect. So let's have a look here at our. The reason why we kind of do this together in the group is because they all work together. So we have here, we've got our back extensors here coming in, and unfortunately you kind of can't see because all the other muscles are in the way. So if we fade all, and through the kind of faded muscles, you can see the intertransversarii. So this is lateral flexion here. So they're helping to kind of like tip the vertebrae to the side. Okay, so lateral flexion, closing the space between the two joints. And the opposite side here, you're going to get those little muscles stretching as well. One of my favorite exercises to kind of get these muscles working is a nice cat-cow and a 4-point lateral flexion, or what I call wagtail, where you just kind of like doing like that. Really, really good. So spinal mobility work is super critical to get all these little muscles firing. Okay. Now, the next level on top of that is these ones here. This is called the Multifidi. Okay. And they go from the sacrum and they thread up all the way to basically the base of your neck here. And then these ones here are more cervical or neck extensors. So that, and you've got a lot of very fine muscles in the neck because the neck has a lot of freedom, a lot of range of movement because you want to be able to turn and look around. So you have a lot of very fine muscles in the neck. So we'll do a whole video on the neck at some point. So the multifidi for the spine, for the thoracic and the lumbar vertebrae particularly, what they do is they attach kind of segmentally 1 or 2 or even 3 vertebrae, and then they go up to the next one. So then they go and they layer on top of each other. It's not really well shown in this diagram. So we can see if we can isolate. There we go. Let's isolate it. So they're going to thread out and they're going to actually attach onto the transverse process as well. So complete anatomy needs to kind of maybe just correct some of this, I think, because you're going to get these multifidi spread out onto the transverse processes. Actually, let me see if I can pull up a better image here. Google Images. All right. That's YouTube. We can see that one. So arterial point therapy, Neil and Asher, who you are, thank you. There we go. So if we look at this image here, you can see that they're going from the transverse process in, they're going up a level, and they kind of stack. All right. Whereas in complete anatomy, it's just showing them go to the vertebral body. So what this should be showing is that these are coming out onto the transverse processes more. So you've got muscle attachments on the transverse processes, which are then going up the next vertebral level. Okay. And they're bigger and they're thicker. So when this muscle contracts, it's going to create extension of the spine and flexion of the spine, and then also rotation of the spine. So if it's just this side contracting, it's going to laterally flex and rotate. And if both levels are contracting, you're going to get back extension or back bending. Okay. Have we got any motion in these ones? Back motion. Let's have a look. So this is a really good image of rotation or twisting. Okay. So as these muscles contracting, they're going to be rotating the spine like so. So you get that looking over your shoulder movement. Okay. So these very subtle movements, really, really important to train. And they work with the obliques and the QLs to create that thoracic rotation. And a lot of people's movement restriction is often related to very tight middle back, as in this section between the shoulder blades and the ribs don't move very well. And so it needs to be trained. And one of the best ways to train it is to practice rotation. And one of the best ways to practice rotation is actually to practice respiration or breathing. So if you look here, you're going to have your diaphragm here. So if you're going to rotate it this way, if you exhale and depress that rib down, it's going to facilitate rotation. And then when you breathe in, the diaphragm moves down and returns you back to neutral. Exhale here, rotate. Inhale, come back to center. So we want to be able to learn how to breathe correctly to create rotation, because the ribs are attaching onto the vertebrae here. So as you turn, one rib goes down, one rib goes up. So one rib internally rotates, one rib externally rotates. And so if these vertebrae aren't moving very well, then the ribs don't move very well. And then if the ribs don't move very well, then the diaphragm doesn't donate very well. And at the same time, you've got the shoulder blade sitting on the rib cage. So if you're trying to reach forward with this hand, that shoulder blade will roll around the ribs and reach. So you'll get more range of movement. But if you don't have good range of movement through the thoracic, okay, you have a lot of restrictions through the shoulder, and that can kind of then transfer into the glenohumeral joint, the shoulder joint, and you get a lot of impingement type problems or neck problems, because if there's a decreased range of movement through the system, then there has to be an increased compensation either above or below that somewhere in the chain. So a lot of people have a lot of issues related to posture because this section between the spine is really stiff. And I've seen people who can't even move their spine, like it's so stiff, they're so locked up. Due bad habit, posture, or accident, or poor training, they really lack rotation. And outside of like some nasty injury or having your actual vertebrae fused together with plates, which I've seen, or pins, where you literally can't move because they're fixed together, we can train this. Okay. And the best way to train it, in my opinion, is learning how to breathe correctly first, because breathing leads the movement, and then you layer in that there. But this is such a good example of rotation of the spine through these multifidi, which are segmentally going to thread up and down the spine. Okay, let's have a look at the other movement. So this is a great example of why I'm a fan of sit-ups and back extension work. Okay. So here we have a fantastic example of hyperextension, neutral, into spinal neutral, and then into spinal flexion. So when you do a spinal flexion, like a forward fold or a sit-up type movement, look at the stretch you get in this back here. So these muscles here, from your tailbone, from your sacrum, thoracolumbar fascia, all these spinal extensor muscles, including the multifidi, are getting lengthened or stretched. Okay. So if you've got tight back, this is how you stretch it. You do a sit-up type shape. Now, if in this position, this is in standing, so gravity will be coming down through here. So then these muscles will be working eccentrically to hold the weight of your torso against the force of gravity pulling you down towards your toes. So if you do standard forward and fold slowly, like rolling and tucking, like you're going to touch your toes against gravity, it's a great way to strengthen your lower back and middle back up and stretch it out. One of the best ways to stretch is to eccentrically lengthen the muscle. So that's where the muscle's contracting, it's working, it's got neural feedback into the tissue, and it's controlling that lengthening. And then you have to then contract concentrically to pull yourself back up from the bottom, and then you roll back up here to neutral. And then from neutral, you go into hyperextension or a back bend here. Perfect. So in this example here, if we've got gravity coming down through there now, so now as soon as you go past neutral here, as soon as the center of gravity moves past, or center of the mass of the torso moves past the center of gravity, which will be basically lining up about here, then the muscle action is going to switch from the lower back doing the work to lift you up to the abdominal on the front to control your back bend. So here you're getting eccentric abdominal work to control your back bend and standing against gravity so you can get all the way back. Now, the range of movement restriction for people is what we call kissing the vertebrae, which is where the vertebrae themselves, where the bones actually start to connect with each other, and they structurally can't go any further. So your back bend is typically restricted by the actual structure or the anatomy of your vertebrae and how much space you have between the transverse and spinous processes. So As you're coming back, if the bones start to connect and contact each other, then your structure can't go any further, and that's as far as you've got. And some people just have more space between their vertebrae, and so they can get bigger back bends. So it means they have a increased mobility, but then they need to match that increased mobility with the strength to match it, because the further they back bend there, the bigger the forces are going to coming down through. They need more control on the front and the back to maintain those positions. So training back bends, lumbar extension is really, really important for back health, and knowing how to do that is really, really important. If you're unsure, working with a good exercise physiologist, a really good personal trainer, clinical Pilates instructor, a really good yoga teacher, a personal trainer who understands movement really well, like essentially a movement professional who has studied movement really well. You can create really healthy spines by training these muscles of the back, because their job is to move the spine, but also keep it strong and stable, so that you can rotate and breathe and ambulate key movement patterns. And then the last one here, we have lateral flexion. And so we've got this side bending of the multi-thigh and coming into lateral flexion, which is amazing. And again, this is why I love my side planks, because in a side plank position, all these muscles are getting worked concentrically. These muscles are getting lengthened eccentrically, depending on position you're in. You're getting all this nice QL, obliques, psoas, all this kind of work. And you're training the spine to be able to move. Having done back rehab with 20 years, like if you've never had a back problem, you know, that's amazing. But if you've had a back problem, you know how basically crap it can be, how life restricting can be. And so my mindset particularly is training happy, healthy spines that move well. And so we need to train these movements. So one way to look at it is you train the movement itself. So multifidi have rotation, they have extension, hyperextension, and you have lateral flexion. So that's 3 movements we need to train. We also have, if you remember back from our psoas video, we have neutral stabilization, so bracing, so that's 4. We have anti-rotation, so resisting rotation, so like you're standing on one leg or carrying a suitcase or a dumbbell. And then we also have, and which is not shown here, flexion. So we need to train all those. So we need 6 movement planes to train to have a healthy spine from the bottom to the top. Okay. And in my experience, to do that properly, you need at least a dedicated movement practice, Pilates, yoga, mobility, functional strength training, gymnastic strength training, something in that line where you are training these movement patterns. Okay. And once you get them working well and you know how to do it, you can integrate that into other training as well. But it's really, really critical, particularly for longevity. But once you get past that kind of 30 years of age and protein synthesis starts to slow down and the recovery and healing starts to slow down, mindset changes from into more of a longevity, keeping your body happy and healthy as you get a little bit older, because we unfortunately haven't figured out how to stop aging yet. It's a factor of life, and we want to do it. And so may as well make it happen in a really healthy and structured way. Okay, so moving on, then we have from, oh, where am I? Next layer, the next layer in. And we have here, we have Longissimus, Spinalis, Iliocostalis. So basically we've got these 3 big layers here. So we've got Longissimus, Spinalis, and Iliocostalis. So the spinalis ones are close to the spine. Longissimus kind of the next one's out, and then the iliocostalis are the next ones out. So spinalis, longissimus, iliocostalis. And they essentially go either side of the spinous process all the way up to the base of the neck, and essentially to about halfway out of your pelvis. So kind of at the top of your pelvis, where your pelvis goes up, that essentially where it's going to attach onto the ridge there, and they're going to thread up, attaching onto the ribs themselves, and then also in onto the spinous processes. So let's have a look at the attachment. So yeah, insertion transverse process of the lumbar and thoracic vertebrae and second to 12th ribs. Okay. So transverse process of the lumbar and thoracic vertebrae. So that's those, if I take the layers out again. So these are the transverse processes here. 12th rib to second rib up here. So all attaching onto the ribs and onto the actual vertebrae itself. So physically attaching to your skeletal structure. And so when they're contracting, their long muscles, they're going to be pulling down. So essentially, depending on the position you start in, that's what you get: extension or back bending. Sometimes axial extension. You'll come across this term axial extension. Let's see if I can pull up another motion. Not that one. Let's have a look at thoracic. Here we go. Let's have a look at it. So back in our forward fold, okay. So when you forward fold to touch your toes, and you come up here to neutral. Okay, so when you just sit tall and you kind of like feel the lengthening going up on, what's happening is these muscles are kind of like segmentally pulling down on the vertebrae, and it kind of back bends you up and lifts your chest up at the same time. Then as you inhale, the diaphragm's doming down and it spreads the ribs out. So, and then your lungs start to fill up with air and you get this expansion and you feel like you're going up and the ribs expand. So this kind of movement is called axial extension. So it's just kind of growing tall through the spine. And that movement's created from all these muscles threading down the spine, just kind of segmentally pulling downward. And that creates the back bend. All right. Then you need what's called a zone of apposition on the front, so abdominals, to maintain the root position. Because if the abdominals are too weak for various reasons, these back bend muscles they can take over, and then you go into this position, the hyperextended position. Okay, it's not quite shown here, but you go more in back bend, and then that puts the diaphragm in a poor position to contract. It goes too far the other way. So there's, like everything, there's a nuance and a balance to movement, but that's axial extension. So you'll see that often referred to. And then if we go into our Iliocostalis lumborum. So lumborum means it's just connecting in the lumbar section, and then you'll have a thoracic section, which is basically the middle backs of the spine. So we have those three layers coming out. And they're just kind of threading up, attaching to the spine. Let's have a look at this one here. Oh, this is the hyperextension. So come through here. So nice forward fold, axial extension, and then into hyperextension. Amazing. Look at that. Beautiful pause there. That's your back bend. That's your hyperextension. Okay. So we want these muscles strong to be able to do this. But in this position, the diaphragm is in a poor position to actually contract. So you can't get a big inhale when you're in full back bend. You can still breathe. You just can't get a lot of air and you can't get a lot of movement because the joints are fully closed down in one position. So when you go to end range in a joint, you get what we call a closed pack position. So it's a very strong position because you can't, there's no movement's not going to happen much because the joints are connected together, which is great. So strong position, but then counteraction to that is then there's no movement, there's no mobility. And so you have restriction of movement. So if you're stuck in this kind of flared bottom rib position, okay, this can create a lot of breathing issues and lower back issues for people, because you can see that the lumbar spine here is in extension. So the QL muscles will be short and tight and strong. Psoas muscle here will be short, tight, and strong because it's going to be pulling down. This way you'll have a kind of an anterior tilt. And so this is going to create a lot of restriction of movement. And what that does is means that you can't rotate, so you can't turn. So then we don't get that rib movement. Okay, and then you don't get a shoulder movement. And so things like running, walking, swimming, cycling are all very restricted. Really good for sagittal plane exercise though. So if you're a sagittal plane athlete, moving just where all you need to do is go straight forward and straight back. If that's all you do, then because you're in a very strong position, you can generate a lot of force. And so for some sports, they don't want a lot of rotation. I can't really think of one off the top of my head. Maybe like rowing, or like if you're doing not so much singles arm row, but like the row, like that's pretty much a forward and back movement. And pretty much every rower I've worked with always got some musculoskeletal problems because rowing is just a really, really bad sport for muscular balance, in my opinion. But cycling is really bad as well. Cycling there's no eccentric phase in a pedal stroke, so you get really good cardiovascular training. But cyclists who just cycle are very, very tight, very, very restricted, often have hips, lower back, thoracic, neck and shoulder issues just because they're in the forward fold position, forward flex position, so long. It's always about balance, creating a balance in the system. Okay, and then from there, if we had put on the last layer, we'll talk about these when we do respiration, your serratus posterior, and then we get into the big back muscle lat. Let's just do a quick little preview of movement for the lats. So in terms of, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of movement here. Shoulder extension and hyperextension. So look at this. So if you want a healthy back, you've got to train lats. So, and the problem with training lats is you need some kind of overhead pulling movement. So kind of think chin up, and you just need to know how to progress that. So bands are really, really good for that. So this is shoulder extension. Okay, so here the spine's in neutral. So you've got nice core, nicely braced abdominals, and then the lats is pulling the shoulder back. This is shoulder extension. All right, and see the movement on the shoulder blade on the ribs. So if you wanted to actually increase this movement, then the shoulder blade needs to slide around the ribs more. And to do that, then the thoracic vertebrae need to rotate a little bit to allow that to happen. And to do that, then you need to actually then, if you're going back that way, you need to be exhaling to create the rotation. So you want an exhale on this side. All right, think about depressing the bottom ribs here a little bit to rotate back. So rotation, think like a pulling through movement. If you are too stiff in the spine here, you won't get this shoulder movement. It's not going to show. This is all shoulder movement through here. So lats is a really big, complex muscle, and we'll do a separate video on that. But you can see here, this is all just looking at shoulder. But if the shoulder is stable and the lats are pulling, the lats attached to the sacrum, lumbar vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae. So you see the line of the fibers. This basically tells you which direction the line of pull is going to go when the muscle contracts. So if your shoulder's fixed, right, think when you do like a deadlift, when they say do a trap or a lat set, all right, you lock your shoulders down, okay, and then that stabilizes the spine, okay, because of this big connection through here. But if your lats are really tight, it's going to create a pull through there. And depending where your shoulder is, it's probably going to create more of an anterior tilt as well. So you get this really tight lat, really tight lower back, really tight psoas, and that creates a postural kyphosis, lordosis type situation in many people, and that's a bit messy. Okay, but we can definitely correct that with the right exercise. But anyway, I digress. So stay tuned when we do the full lat video. That's probably going to be a full hour just to kind of break down the lats. Such an important muscle. So being able to do chin-ups, we'll just finish this today. If you can train yourself to do chin-ups, assisted, or even just full bodyweight chin-ups, for men, you should be able to do at least 5. Yeah, that is such a good movement to train because you're going to get pretty much every muscle in the shoulder, in the posterior shoulder and the spine active when you're doing chin-ups properly. Not my favorite exercise to do, but I make myself do them because they're really, really good. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good overview of the spinal extensors. The one thing we didn't talk about is the nerve. Is the nerves. Where is this going? Sometimes complete anatomy can be really clunky to use. I'm not going to lie. So if we go back to our multifidi just to finish off today, and we look at info, and we come down here and we look at innervation, medial branches of the posterior rami of the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar nerves. So basically what that means is that the segmental innervation. So right down the nerve, like down the spinal column, out of each foramen here, you have nerves coming out, and they're going to innervate at the segment, at the level of the back. So if you get like a lower back injury here, the section of the spine where the nerves come out may be interfered with, but the rest of the spinal muscles will be working. So this is a really good use for us. So if you have some nerve compression in a segment of the spine, then we have lots of redundancy because each level of the spine has its own kind of nerve innervation. So that means we can train it, we can compensate while you're rehabbing, and then also, unless the nerve has actually been physically cut or it's been compressed, as in like it's getting squished by like a protruding disc or something, we can retrain it. It's just about facilitating healing with good nutrition, with good movement, and progressing and loading over a period of time so that the muscle heals, and then you put a stimulus in it, it lays down more protein, grows a little bit stronger, and then you keep repeating that process. And you're placing the nervous system in a way that it can communicate and feedback to the central nervous system about it's safe, it's effective, and you're free to do the movement. But once the brain senses that it's safe and as you're going to re-injure it, it will allow you to do the movement. But if it thinks it's still going to get hurt or injured, it can kind of like inhibit the muscle, and then you won't get the training or retraining effect. And that's where chronic pain and understanding how the brain works and how movement works in terms of rehabilitation to chronic pain is often when you like do imaging and you look at the structures with imaging, the old injury is healed, it's no longer there, but the brain still remembers the old injury and still thinks there's a problem there. So we need to basically retrain the nervous system as well to go, you're safe, you're okay, we can start layering exercise, and then you slowly build it up from there. So it's a bit art and it's a bit science. There's definitely science under it, but it's art because like every person is different because everyone has a unique experience and has all these different unique stimulus coming into them. So even though the movement's basically the same for everybody, the way people adapt and respond to movement is very unique and individual to the person. So the coach, the therapist, the personal trainer, the yoga teacher, the Pilates instructor, they all need to basically individualize the exercise to the person in front of them. And that's the kind of the art and the science of what we do. Okay, let's leave it there for today. So that's the back extensors, huge muscle groups, all working to do the same movement, super important for back rehab. And I always tell my clients, if you're rehabbing your back, we actually have to train the back muscles. Like you can't not train the back muscles. Just going and get manual therapy and massage and needling and rolling a foam roller can make you feel good for a little bit. But until you retrain the muscles to be strong enough to resist the forces and the loads coming into the system, you're going to be on the hamster wheel of re-injury in that cycle. If you want to get out of that cycle, if you're sick of being in pain, you've got to train it. Okay. Okay, so enough of me talking. Like, share, feed the algorithm for the channel. Any questions, please feel free to jump down there. You can visit me over on my Facebook page as well. You can just type in my name, Andrew Dowler. You'll find me there. And, love to hear from you. Like, leave your message. Okay, until next one. Next video, we'll keep looking at all these back muscles. So we may even explore the lats next. Okay, we'll see you then.